It was late, very late. Alex stood alone on the quiet train platform. His hands were cold, and his breath showed in the air. The clock on the station wall said it was already past midnight. He had missed the last regular train home. Now, the only option left was to wait for the midnight train. The platform was empty, and the silence felt heavy. Only the sound of the clock ticking filled the air. Alex checked his phone. No messages, no calls. He was alone, and he was tired. Just when he started to think about walking home, the train arrived. It was old, with dim lights and dirty windows. But Alex didn't care. He just wanted to get home and sleep. The doors opened with a hiss, and Alex stepped inside. The train wasn't crowded. Only a few people were sitting quietly in their seats. No one looked up. When Alex entered, he found a seat by the window and sat down. The train started to move. At first, everything seemed normal. The train passed by familiar stations. Alex stared out the window, watching the lights flash by. But after a while, something felt strange. The names of the stations began to change. They weren't names Alex knew. He told himself that he was just tired. Maybe he was imagining things. But the strange feeling wouldn't go away. The passengers were all too quiet. They didn't talk, didn't move. They just sat there, staring blankly into space. Alex shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His heart started to beat faster. Something wasn't right. Where was this train going? The train kept moving, and Alex uneasy grew. He looked out the window again, hoping to see something familiar. But the stations passing by were getting weirder. One station had no name at all. The sign was completely blank. Another was surrounded by thick trees, like it was in the middle of a forest. No one got on, and no one got off. Alex's hands gripped the armrests. His heart pounded in his chest. These stations didn't belong on this line. He was sure of it. He had taken this train many times before, but he had never seen these stops. He looked around at the other passengers. They still didn't move. They sat like statues, their eyes empty and distant. Alex wanted to ask someone if they knew what was happening, but fear kept him silent. The train slowed as it approached another station. This one had no lights. The platform was dark, and the shadows seemed to move in the corners of Alex's vision. The train didn't stop, though. It sped past the dark station, heading deeper into the unknown. Alex's stomach tightened with fear. He pulled out his phone, hoping to check his location, but there was no signal. He couldn't even call for help. The train kept moving, faster and faster. The lights flickered, and the air grew colder. Alex's hands were shaking now. He wanted to get off this train, but it didn't seem like it was going to stop anytime soon. Alex couldn't take it anymore. He needed to talk to someone. Anyone. He stood up from his seat and walked down the aisle, looking at the passengers. As he passed, they all sat still, their eyes staring straight ahead. None of them reacted to Alex's movement. It was as if they didn't see him at all. "Excuse me," Alex said, stopping beside a man in a dark coat. The man didn't respond. He just kept staring forward. "Do you know where this train is going?" Alex asked again, louder this time. But the man didn't move, didn't blink. Alex felt a chill run down his spine. The man wasn't ignoring him. It was as if he couldn't hear Alex at all. Alex moved to the next passenger, a woman in a long dress. "Can you hear me?" he asked, waving his hand in front of her face. But she didn't even flinch. Her eyes were open, but they didn't seem to see anything. Fear tightened its grip on Alex's chest. He rushed through the carriage, trying to talk to more passengers, But it was the same with all of them. They were like lifeless dolls, sitting in their seats, completely still. Alex's breathing quickened. He was trapped on a train full of silent, unmoving people, heading to knows where. Panic surged through him. He had to find a way out. Alex ran to the door at the end of the carriage. He grabbed the handle and tried to pull it open, but it was locked. He banged on the door, shouting for help. "Let me out, please, someone help." But no one responded. The passengers remained silent and still. The train roared forward, faster and faster, and the lights above flickered again. Alex turned and rushed to the other end of the carriage, hoping to find an open door. But when he reached the next set of doors, they were locked too. No matter how hard he pulled or pushed, they wouldn't budge. His heart pounded in his chest. He was trapped. The train wasn't going to stop, and there was no way out. Suddenly, the train slowed down. Alex rushed to the window, hoping to see something familiar outside. The train was pulling into another station, but this one was different. It was larger than the others, with bright lights and clean platforms. For a moment, Alex felt a glimmer of hope, but then he saw them, the people waiting on the platform. They weren't like the other passengers. They were wearing masks, their faces hidden behind strange, blank expressions. They didn't move like normal people. Their movements were slow, stiff, and unnatural. The train stopped, and the doors opened. The masked people began to board the train. Alex backed away, his heart racing. He didn't know what these people were, but he didn't want to find out. The doors closed, and the train moved again. Alex was still trapped, and now the strange, masked passengers were on board. Alex couldn't take it anymore. He had to know what was happening. There had to be someone in charge. Maybe the conductor could help. He made his way to the front of the train, where the conductor's cabin was. The lights flickered above him, casting long shadows on the floor. The train rattled and roared, and the walls felt like they were closing in on him. When he reached the cabin, he knocked on the door. "Hello, I need to talk to you. Please, open the door." There was no answer. Alex knocked again, harder this time. "Please, I need to know where this train is going." Finally, the door creaked open. Alex stepped inside. The conductor stood at the controls, his back to Alex. "Where are we going?" Alex asked, his voice trembling. The conductor didn't turn around. "We are going where we always go," he said in a low, raspy voice. Alex didn't understand. "What does that mean? Can I get off at the next stop?" The conductor slowly turned to face Alex. His face was hidden in the shadows, but Alex could feel his cold gaze. "There is no next stop for you," the conductor said. Alex's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? I need to get home." The conductor's lips twisted into a thin smile. "Home? You're not going home. No one ever does." Alex felt a wave of cold fear wash over him. He was trapped. There was no way off this train. The conductor turned back to the controls, ignoring Alex completely. The train sped up again, roaring down the tracks, faster than ever before. Alex stumbled out of the cabin, his mind racing. He couldn't stay on this train. He had to find a way out. But how? Every door was locked, and the passengers were like lifeless dolls. The stations were getting stranger, and the conductor had just confirmed his worst fear. There was no going home. The train passed through another station, but Alex didn't even look at it. He knew by now that it wouldn't matter. The train wouldn't stop for him. It wouldn't stop for anyone. Alex sat down in one of the empty seats. His heart was pounding, and his hands were shaking. He felt completely helpless. The train was like a cage, and he was its prisoner. But then, something strange happened. The lights in the train dimmed, and the windows fogged up. Alex wiped at the window with his hand, trying to see outside, but it was no use. The train was speeding through a thick, dark fog. It felt like they were moving through another world. Alex looked around, but the passengers were still, as silent and still as ever. The masked figures that had boarded at the last station sat in the back, their heads tilted forward like they were sleeping. The air inside the train felt colder, and Alex could see his breath in the dim light. He shivered, pulling his coat tighter around him. His mind raced with thoughts of escape, but every option seemed impossible. He was on a train that never stopped, heading into the unknown. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. It was impossible to tell. Time seemed to move differently. On the train, Alex sat with his head resting against the window, watching the fog swirl outside. His eyelids were heavy, and his body was exhausted. But just as he was about to drift off to sleep, he heard something, a sound, faint at first, like a whisper. Alex sat up, his heart racing. He looked around, but the passengers were still silent, their eyes staring blankly ahead. Then he heard it again, a soft, whispering voice. It seemed to come from all around him, like the walls of the train were speaking to him. Get off, before it's too late. Alex's blood turned cold. He stood up, trying to find the source of the voice, but there was no one there. The whisper came again, louder this time. Get off, before it's too late. Alex's heart pounded in his chest. The voice was warning him. But how could he get off when the train wasn't stopping? He ran to the door, pulling at the handle, but it was still locked. He banged on the door, shouting for help. Let me out. Please, let me out. But a voice only whispered again, its tone more urgent now. Get off, before it's too late. Alex's mind raced. Was the train going to crash? Was something terrible going to happen? If he stayed on board, he had to find a way out. But the doors wouldn't open, and the windows were too thick to break. Desperation surged through him. He couldn't stay on this train. He had to escape. Alex backed away from the door, his mind racing. The whispering voice still echoed in his ears, warning him to get off the train. But how could he, when it wouldn't stop? His heart pounded in his chest as he turned to the silent passengers once more. Something wasn't right. The masked figures that had boarded earlier seemed different now. Their heads were still tilted forward, but their bodies, they were moving, slowly, but definitely moving. Alex watched in horror as one of the masked passengers lifted their head. The mask was featureless, just a blank, white face, no eyes, no mouth. But the figure turned its head toward Alex, as if it could see him. He froze, fear gripping his body. The figure stood up, its movement slow and unnatural. Alex backed away, his breath coming in short gasps. The figure began to walk toward him, its feet shuffling on the floor of the train. Get off, before it's too late. The whispering voice returned. But this time, it wasn't just in his head. It was coming from the figure. Alex's legs felt weak, but he forced himself to move. He ran down the aisle, past the unmoving passengers, and into the next carriage. His heart pounded in his chest as he reached the door at the end of the carriage, hoping it would open. It was locked, of course. Alex banged on the door in desperation, but no one came. He turned around, and, to his horror, the masked figure was still following him. Its movements were slow, but steady, and behind it, the other masked figures were rising from their seats, one by one. Panic surged through Alex. As he realized he was trapped, he ran to the other end of the carriage, hoping to find another exit. But the door was locked. Just like all the others, he was stuck, with nowhere to go. And the masked figures were closing in on him. "Get off, before it's too late." The whispering voice was louder now, more urgent. Alex turned to see the figures moving toward him, their blank faces emotionless, but their presence filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. He backed into the corner, his hands shaking. He could hear the train rattling faster along the tracks, but there was no way off. He was trapped. Suddenly, the train screeched to a halt. Alex's heart leapt in his chest. Maybe this was his chance. He rushed to the door, hoping it would open. But as the train stopped, the lights flickered, and everything went dark. For a moment, there was complete silence. Alex stood frozen, his breath heavy in the darkness. And then, slowly, the lights came back on. But something was different. The train was still moving. The passengers were gone. Alex blinked in confusion. The seats that had been filled with passengers just moments ago were now completely empty. The masked figures had disappeared as well. It was as if they had never been there at all. He turned in circles, trying to make sense of what was happening. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination? But the fear in his chest told him it was real. Something terrible was happening on this train, and he was right in the middle of it. As Alex stood alone in the empty carriage, he noticed something strange. One of the windows was no longer fogged up. He could see outside. But what he saw made his stomach drop. Instead of trees or buildings passing by, he saw another train. It was moving alongside his, perfectly parallel. But this other train wasn't normal. It looked identical to the one he was on. Same old, rusty carriages, same dim lights. But there was something different in the windows of the other train. Alex could see people. He squinted, moving closer to the window to get a better look. The people in the other train, they were passengers, just like the ones that had been on his train. But they weren't sitting in their seats. They were standing, all of them, facing the windows, staring straight at Alex. His heart pounded as he realized that the passengers in the other train were watching him. Their faces were blank, their eyes wide and lifeless. They stood motionless, as if waiting for something. Alex backed away from the window, his skin crawling with fear. And then, as if in response to his movements, the passengers in the other train began to smile, their lips stretched unnaturally wide, their eyes never blinking. It was the most horrifying smile Alex had ever seen. He turned away from the window, his mind racing. What was happening? Was this some kind of nightmare he couldn't wake up from? That train rattled loudly, and the lights flickered again. When Alex looked back at the window, the other train was gone. Alex was on the verge of collapse. His mind felt like it was unraveling. How could this be real? How could he be trapped in a never-ending nightmare on a train that seemed to exist in a world all its own? He needed answers, and there was only one place to get them. The conductor. With trembling hands, Alex made his way back to the front of the train, where the conductor's cabin was. His footsteps echoed loudly in the empty carriage, the sound bouncing off the metal walls. He knocked on the door again, harder this time. No response. Alex's fear turned into frustration. He slammed his fist against the door. I need to know what's happening. Please, tell me where we're going. The door creaked open, and Alex stepped inside. The conductor was there, but something was different. His face, which had been hidden before, was now clearly visible. It was pale, almost ghostly, with deep, sunken eyes that seemed to stare into Alex's soul. We are always going, the conductor said in a voice that sent chills down Alex's spine. This train never stops. Alex felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. But why? Where are we going? The conductor smiled, a slow, eerie smile that made Alex's skin crawl. We're going to the place where time doesn't matter, where passengers ride forever. Alex's legs felt weak. He stumbled backward, his mind spinning. I want to get off. Let me off this train. The conductor's smile faded. There's no getting off. Once you board, you're a passenger forever. Alex's mind raced with fear. He had to get off this train. But how? The conductor had made it clear. There was no escape. The train was heading to a place where time didn't exist, where passengers rode forever. But Alex wasn't going to give up. He refused to be trapped on this nightmare train for eternity. Suddenly, the train slowed down again. Alex ran to the window, his heart pounding. They were approaching another station, but this station was different. It wasn't dark and empty like the others. It was bright, with people moving on the platform. It looked normal. For the first time in what felt like hours, Alex felt a spark of hope. Maybe this was his chance to escape. The train came to a stop, and the doors slid open. Alex didn't hesitate. He bolted down the aisle, past the empty seats, and out onto the platform. His feet hit the ground, and he felt a rush of relief. He was off the train. But as he looked around, his relief turned to horror. The people on the platform weren't moving. They were standing still, their heads turned toward him, their eyes blank and lifeless. And then he heard it, the whispering voice, louder now. You can never leave. Alex's heart sank. He turned back to the train, but the doors had already closed. The train was pulling away, leaving him behind on the platform with the unmoving people. He was trapped, whether on the train or off. There was no escape. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Also, check out more interesting English stories on this channel.